If you can say no, you can hear us. Well, welcome. This is the third annual Sinclair Lewis High School Writers Workshop. We had the first one in Sauk Center in 2019, canceled 2 years in a row because of COVID. Last year in Sauk, this year here in Melrose. We're happy to be here. The purpose of this is to talk about professional writing, maybe spark an interest, find out a little bit what you're interested in, what your writing level and questions are. Very informal. We will take questions as they come up with a hand raise. My name is Jim Umhoefer. I'm the president of the Sinclair Lewis Foundation in Sauk Center. We have sponsored the Sinclair Lewis Writers Conference every year in Sauk Center since 1990. Probably one of the longest running writers conferences in the country. Part of our goal, our mission as a foundation, is to honor and perpetuate the memory and works of Sinclair Lewis and to continue his legacy of mentoring writers. If you're having a hard time hearing, come on down a little bit closer. So, we're all about trying to mentor writers. Sinclair Lewis was the first American to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. He grew up in Sauk Center High School graduate.
Thank you.
Sinclair Lewis was a mentor to a lot of young writers, and that's our goal here today. I want to introduce ourselves as well as being part of the Sinclair Lewis Foundation. I'm a traveler that likes to do writing. I want to introduce Julie Pfitzinger. Julie has a writing background as well as publishing.
Yes. Yeah.
And Danny Klecko, who is a baker who likes to write. So let's find out a little bit about what class is this here. Is it one class or two classes? Okay.
There's a 10th grade biology class here.
All right. That's wonderful. Raise your hand if anybody here writes a journal or some poetry or some essays for yourself. Raise your hand here if you like to actually have a book on a Kindle or in hand to read a book for fun. Let's do a little quick survey here. What type of you can speak out loud, what type of writing are you most interested in, or stories? Anybody?
Horror.
Say it again?
Horror.
Horror stories. How about fantasy, science fiction? How about biographies? Historical fiction? Poetry? Any type? Okay. So that's enough to get us started with here. Julie, if I can start with you, can you give us a little bit about your writing background and how you kind of evolved that into publishing?
Yeah.
From the point of view of our goal today is that you might leave a little bit inspired to continue whatever type of writing or literature that you might be interested in. Did you have a question, Tracy?
You want to use the mic?
Does it work now?
Oh, it's not working.
No, it was dead. Taylor went to try to find it to get a new one. She said it worked 2 minutes ago, but it's dead now. All right, go ahead, Julie. If you can.
All right. Well, I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I became interested in writing when I was your age, for sure. And when I was in high school, I worked on the yearbook, and it was just something that always attracted me. I majored in English in college, and then I started freelance writing when I was in my 20s. I started writing for a community newspaper, which is a good way to get your foot in the door if you're just starting out. And from there, I went to bigger newspapers. I went to magazines. I was the editor of several magazines in Minneapolis at one point. And now I've moved into the digital world of editorial content for readers who are 50 and older, so older than you, Next Avenue. It's a Twin Cities Public Television production. So what I will say about writing and editing, etc., just briefly, first of all, it was so gratifying to see all those hands up about reading books, because that's where it all starts. That's where it all starts. Your love for language, your love for words. It starts with other people's language and other people's words. And I think that that's just great. And I know you all have a lot more options of what to read than just books. But again, it's language. And I think language is something that I was always drawn to. I've always just appreciated good writing. I've written many stories in my life, feature stories, things like that. And I love telling stories. I love meeting people and finding out their stories and then conveying that to the reader. It's really important, and I think nowadays to connect with whoever you connect with. I mean, there are probably thousands of people that have read my stories, and I'm not glorifying my own impact on this world, but literally there probably are. I'll never know them, I'll never know anything about them, but maybe they took 15 minutes to read something that I wrote. That's kind of a big deal when you think about it. And I still love it. I will never not love it. I will never not love reading. And I don't know, so maybe I will stop with my little spiel right now, but I just want to close by saying I'm really happy to see all of you here, so thank you. For you?
Danny, a little bit about your background and how you came to writing from baking and your colored past.
So, yeah, my background is different than Julie's. For me, you know, if you like to write, writing is super competitive, and you have to be networked oftentimes, and you have to be in systems, and you have to compete against other writers. And I'm a master bread baker. I've been baking for 45 years. And I've always found people are typically more interested, especially people in power, when I tell them that I'm a baker who writes as opposed to a writer who bakes. And there's a big difference. You know, each one of us has skill sets. You know, so if you're just talking about being a writer, for instance, I mean, it puts you in a camp with, you know, so many other things that the people who are listening, it's going to be their perception. But if you start off by showing people what you're passionate about, I mean, over the course of my career, I've baked for numerous American presidents. When you guys are too young, but the former president of Russia, Mikhail Gorbachev, came to St. Paul, where I live. And I got to bake a loaf for him and the governor as a sign of peace, and it was in the newspaper and stuff like that. People are always more interested in the baker than the writer, but I've used my ability, you know, and I don't have the same academic background as Julie, but you know, in a lot of what we're doing, all three of us, Jim as well, I think when you do traveling and go to different places around the world, just to survive the world, it takes confidence. And so my two things that I'm going to just encourage you guys to do is, I mean, you have to be confident. Even if you're not, fake it. Because fake confidence will breed confidence. And I mean, that's a huge thing. And then the other part for me is I've learned that writing is a team sport. I've had success. I mean, I've read, I opened in DC a couple years ago. I opened National Poetry Month on the rooftop of the Apollo. I've launched books in the Watergate Hotel. I launched books in the Fitzgerald Museum, you know, and down in Montgomery, Alabama. You know, I've had these opportunities through literature to go all across the country and stuff like that, but never in a million years would I have ever been able to do it without my team. So, you know, part of it is finding people smarter than yourselves, plugging into them, asking questions, taking the criticism and moving on. Jim?
I started out, actually I'm a retired high school special education teacher for 35 years. I worked in Madison, Wisconsin. I taught juvenile sex offenders in Sauk Center at the correctional facility before it closed. Finished my career at Albany High School. I was a special education administrator for a while. Always had my summers off. And that's when I did my traveling, and then I turned that into freelance travel writing and photography. Over the years, I've written and photographed 4 outdoor guidebooks, 2 each on Minnesota and Wisconsin, coffee table book on outhouses, which is my proudest accomplishment. Got an online travel magazine, Seasoned Vagabond, seasoned because of the color of my hair, and I like to travel. And I like to share stories and encourage other people to travel. I've probably had about 4,000 to 5,000 of my photographs published over the years, and maybe 350 of my travel stories. So my background's a little bit different, but the same thing about networking, persistence,
I believe that persistence will out-trump talent most days. It's the person that does not give up and does not necessarily take no for an answer. Julie, from an editor point of view, many times you have had to respectfully decline somebody's proposal.
Many
And I'm
times.
sure that you've done it in a tactful way.
Yeah.
Initial mistake that I made, and I'm hoping that none of you will, is that if you put yourself out there, locally or some other venue in which to publish your work, if it's turned down, it is not a personal thing. That's a big ask. People put their heart and their soul into the writing that they do. And if somebody says, I can't use it right now, sometimes the go-to response is, what's wrong with me? Well, no, there's nothing wrong with you. It's a business. What is different about this piece of writing that does not work for a publication at that time? That's where the persistence comes in. I've had travel editors from Minneapolis to Los Angeles and Denver and Chicago that have said no to a particular piece of the story, but that's for this year. One editor from the Chicago Tribune said, no for this year, ask me again next year. So persistence is a big thing. I want to give you guys a chance right now. Is there any initial questions about the publishing world, maybe something that you didn't know before, or something that you would like to find out more about? Raise your hand if you have any type of question or comment here. Those of you that raised your hand before, say about poetry. Who here that, raise your hands again if you've written poetry. There's two reasons to write, basically, and maybe you can elaborate on that. You write for yourself or you write for others. So it's a big risk sometimes to put your writing out there for other people to see it. Who here would like to see their work in print sometime, either online or in print? All right, Tracy, tell us a little about that.
Oh, I didn't expect to say anything. There's all sorts of stories that pile into my head, and maybe yours too, and they come out on paper and then they get shoved on the shelf for later. So I hope unload my shelf and get going on those.
Who here that raised their hand about this would be able to share something with us about maybe a dream or someplace they'd like to see their work? Taylor.
Well, I teach a lot of interesting things in my classes, and sometimes I get hung up with like wanting to write the next interesting thing. Like we study the Crucible and we study 1984, and I see these as having a big impact on the world. So then I'm thinking like, what should I write the next thing? But then I think I shouldn't get as caught up with what should be written and just start writing. But I think my ultimate goal would be something that we could study one day in class.
I want to ask Danny and Julie to comment on that. From your perspective, Danny, the question was like, I'd like to write, but what should I write? How would you respond to something like that?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to, and it sounds cliche, but you have to find your voice. Me, if I write it, it's going to be romantic. If I write it, it's going to end with some kind of joy. I do have cynical thoughts, but you guys have enough of that in your life, so I try not to. But remember, I'm trained in hospitality. Every day of my life, my job is to make sure that people leave happy and fulfilled. But one of the things that's interesting, and I think that I have an advantage over most people with an MFA, is that I've learned hospitality. And at the end of the day, when you guys go home, very few times are people going to critique a book or whatever. But what they're going to do is say, did I have a good time or didn't I have a good time or things like that. So for me, I almost never will send an editor from I don't do it anymore, my publisher does, but I've been in the New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune. I never lead with the book. Oftentimes what I do is I lead with an event. Once again, the baker is more valuable than the writer. The people with the power, they get poems, books, they're inundated, it becomes white noise. But they don't meet many master bread bakers. So if they have if their grandmother has a Yugoslavian Danish recipe or a Baltic sourdough, I know it and I can work it through. And plus, when you work in kitchens, you work with all kinds of crazy people, so it's pretty interesting. And any of you guys work in the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, stuff like that? No? Okay. Oh, you do?
There's a handful.
Okay. You're my horror friend. So where do you work? Oh, a deli, even better. And by the way, since you're in horror, have you started Stephen King's new book, Holly? Okay, get on it. All right, Julie, how about you?
Well, so I wanted to just piggyback on something that was said about where to start, how to start. And I love the expression, getting the stories off the shelves, that you used, Tracy, too. Because that's the hardest part, I think. That's a really hard part. If you have a story that you want to tell, and you open up your computer and you think, now what? You know, and I think that just giving yourself the grace to do it, and to be vulnerable. And you could be writing about a bike race. I'm not talking about like your deepest, darkest secrets and things. Just start and just put your thoughts together and then look at it again and look at it again times 43, and then you're done. And then you turn it in. You already have experience with that with your papers that you're doing for school. I know that. And writing out, writing for magazines, different than for school. But yeah, and I do think also it's not personal when editors turn you down. We get, at Next Avenue, we have about 200 pitches a month, which is kind of a lot. That's 200 people that have put themselves on the line to say, here's my story, would you publish it? We have to turn down a lot of them, and it's hard. It's hard for me to do that. We have like, because we're busy and it's a small team, we have an automated form, and I kind of love using that sometimes if it's a story idea that I'm like, no, and then I don't love other times because I want to say, but here's why we're not taking it, But you have to be confident in your writing, and you have to keep trying, and whatever your path is in terms of, writing, editing, writing music, writing poetry, whatever you want to do, you have to trust yourself, and the rest is going to follow.
So one of the questions I have is for our friend Jim here. If you don't know Jim, he travels more than 95% of Americans, and I'm really curious, Jim, with your photographs and/or your stories. Do you have those in mind when you're going to a destination? Or do you get to the destination and those things, basically fall into your lap, and then, how does your process work?
Yes to both parts of that question. From a business point of view, I'm going to talk about the freelance travel writing photography business back when I first got started. I would pitch an idea to a travel editor, say the Minneapolis Star Tribune or the St. Paul Pioneer Press or Chicago Tribune or wherever, and the editor would say, yes, we're interested, but you're doing this work on speculation. It means that the publication takes no risk. Speculation means it's my time and my effort, I submit it, they can say yes or no. So I left out, I kind of found a niche, and then I would get what they call assignments. Editors would contact me. Jim, would you go to Sturgis and cover the motorcycle rally? Jim, would you go to Lanesboro, Minnesota and write about the bike trail? So those are assignments, and that's a different realm. I usually don't go in with a preconceived notion about what an experience is going to be, because then I'm kind of closing my eyes to what's happening. I do keep a handwritten journal yet. I tried doing it digitally. I do all my WordPress digitally, but my journal is still handwritten. And I don't do it day to day. It's not a diary. It's a journal of what senses do I experience, what happened, but what's my impression of it. It's amazing that if you go back and think for your family vacations or certain experiences that you've had, and you let it, if you don't record it, and you come back to it about 3 months later, you will have forgotten most of what the experience is like. I find that my journaling helps me to remember, like, oh yeah, that's what that was like, and I can reconnect. In my business, to write a travel story, I can't write about something like the Grand Canyon. That's way too broad. What about the Grand Canyon? How about maybe a burro ride down to the Grand Canyon. They call it a slice or an angle for a story, and you probably look at that as well, Julie.
Yeah.
What is it about that big picture? And I use a thing that creative mapping on a piece of paper on my computer. I'll have a central title of the Grand Canyon, and then I'll have little branches coming off of it. What did I see? What did I feel? What did I do? What might be interesting to somebody? Why would somebody care about reading about my experience in the Grand Canyon? In my profession, I use 4 behaviors in what I write. What did you see? What did you feel? What did you think? What are the options? And what did you do? Now, I mix those up. I don't necessarily write sequentially, but I have each of those 4 elements in each one of my story. The see is the vision. The feel part is why should anybody care? The option part is what are the details? And then how can somebody duplicate it? So that's a little bit about the way I do it, but Julie, maybe you want to comment on a little bit about that from the editorial point of view?
Yeah, thank you. I think that is probably the way that a lot of people approach writing, which is very helpful for editors because you can see very clearly the story that somebody wants to tell. You know, we do writing that's a little bit more technical on things like saving for retirement and things like that. But the things that I love the most, and the section of the publication that is in my wheelhouse is the personal essays. So that's a lot of what I saw, what I felt, you know, and if it comes through in the writing, it resonates with other readers. And again, back to what I was saying before, writing that you can do wherever you do it, you have no idea who's reading it, who's seen it, how it's touched them, how it's affected them and wanted them to do something make change in some way, or volunteer. We do a lot of stories about pets on Next Avenue, and we do a lot about volunteering with pets. Those stories always do really well because people don't know that something exists, and then they find out because that's something that appeals to them. So service journalism is a lot of what we do at Next Avenue too. There's all different kinds. But to Jim's point, the angle or the peg, the story peg, is important because you need focus, and that's as a writer, as a young writer, as an older writer too, you have to figure out what is the story I want to tell. I don't want to tell 24 stories in one story. I want to tell one story. I can have different examples, but I want to tell one story. What is that story?
So, Julie, if one of these students had an idea for a poetry or a story that had an angle or a peg to it, how would they approach an editor?
Well, I think it's a lot easier today, honestly. A lot of editors are visible online. If there's a publication that you like, for example, you can find email address or contact us box. You know, in the olden days, I had sent some stories in an envelope. You didn't know this was history class, did you? But the gratification is a little bit quicker, you know, nowadays that you will, if someone's interested in what you have to say and someone's interested in your perspective, then they'll take it to the next step. So I think, you know, it depends again on what kind of writing you want to do, what kind of publications you're interested in. But I think, you know, there's a lot of competition for space, even digital space. You know, you think, well, if you have a digital magazine, you don't have limitations. Yeah, you do. You know, we publish 20 stories a week, which seems like a lot, but that's 80 stories a month. But we can't publish 800 stories a month. They'd all get lost. That's the other thing. We want things to come to the surface, and then, you know, we have social media and all that kind of thing. And back in the magazine days too, it was the same thing. We would have writers. I worked with many writers at the magazines, and they would have an idea. They would have seen something interesting in their community. They would have attended an event or met a teacher. We used to do a lot of stories about teachers and students, which was my favorite. The August issue of all the titles, we would profile students. I loved that because those are stories that are ready to be told. So, does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Real quick, and I don't want to take us off track, but number 58, are you a center? Okay, I thought you look like a center. And my son is a center. And I understand it's homecoming today?
No, it's Sox Center.
Oh, in Sauk Center.
Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry about that. Who are you playing tonight? Well, are you going to win? All right. Good for you. Are you a long snapper too? Long snapper is a quick trip to D1. All right. One of the things, though, real quick, I wanted to touch base on too is I think it's super important. You know, if you're wanting to get your work into the eyes of other people, you know, I mean, everyone has a different strategy or whatever, but I like to pinpoint things towards success. A lot of times, I'm not necessarily writing what I want to do. I want to build a relationship. If I see an editor publishes books about certain things, or publishes articles about certain things, I'll write about those things or whatever. But you know, one of the things that's super important, and I think especially as a younger writer, the mistake I made a lot of it about myself. I like to talk about myself. I like me. But you know, sometimes the rest of the world doesn't want to hear that. So if you can remove yourself as a writer and then take an experience, or I mean, and Jim knows this as well as anyone. Jim is writing about things that are going to touch with each one of you guys, different places, different destinations, different activities. So in the world of writing, you know, if you start off technically learning how to put the focus, and it starts with the focus before anything else, you put that focus onto something of interest to your demographic and get it into the hands of your demographic. I mean, it's like, it's easy to succeed. Julie?
I have something I want to add when we're talking about pitches. I'm going to tell you one of the best pitches I've ever received in my career was one that said, St. Paul Magazine needs Klecko. And he sent me, the magazine had just published, literally, it had just gone out the door. And that was the memo line, and he explained why our magazine needed to have him featured, and we did. I mean, you can't deny that pitch. You can't be like, nah, no. But that's, you know, he had the story that he wanted to tell. I mean, I wrote it. He didn't write it. He did write for St. Paul Magazine down the road. But, you know, if you have what you want to say, what you want to communicate, be creative. Because like I was saying before, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of noise out in the world. I don't have to tell you guys that. You've grown up with it. But be creative. Be succinct. I always have a hard time saying that word. But be that. And make your pitch in a way that's going to grab attention. So, just wanted to add that in.
I'm going to tell you one of the secrets that I use, because like anything, I don't know if you ever have a dream and then you wake up and you remember the dream and you think, wow, I want to remember this, but you forget it like 5 minutes later. The same thing can be said with writing ideas. On TV, you see the writer, you know, sitting in front of a typewriter or a computer or whatever, and they always talk about writer's block. I don't believe in that. I've never had writer's block in my life because my process, what I do, is when I go into the world, I bring my cell phone with me and I text myself things all the time. So I have all these bullet points, and at the end of the night, I go home and then I put them onto a clipboard. And it's kind of like the murder mysteries where you see the spider webs with the different people or whatever. I have all these different clipboards on there, and I'm able to take different things from different topics because I don't write one book at a time. I'm usually writing 2 or 3 books, jumping back and forth, because all too often, if I sit down like with the poems, you're a poet, and I don't know what your process is, but you know what I do? Like people will say, I'm going to write a poem a day for 365 days. Guess what? You're going to have 365 bad poems. You know, you might get lucky on a few of them. A poem is something that you need to live with, you need to sleep with. I mean, just because it's shorter doesn't mean that it's less valuable. So a lot of these different things you want to, you know, have in your sight line and just work on them as time goes by. I mean, I've had poems that, you know, I've finished in 5 minutes, but for the most time, a poem can take a week, a month, even a year. Jim, your thoughts?
Several thoughts about that. First one is authenticity. Taylor, you brought that up a little bit. You're wondering, what should I write? An editor, or especially, the editor is the first reader. If you can't get your pitch, or what in my profession we would call it queries, if you can't get that past the editor, you're not going to get to the readers. People have their radar up. From a travel writing point of view, if I write about an experience that I didn't have, or talked about someplace that I pretended to be, people, it's hard to build credibility, but it can go away just like that. So authenticity, be who you are, don't pretend to be something that you're not. Persistence goes a long way with that. Getting your foot in the door. Danny, on the way down here, you were talking that you reached out to some publications about giving them a chance to compete for your work. Tell us about that, because that's just a little bit of opposite thinking.
Yeah, well,
Julie's laughing.
you know, I don't compete with anyone. I mean, I'm me. And you either take it or you leave it. You know, you don't see me standing in the line. And that's a little bit of ego, but it's also a formula to success. When I decided that I was going to write columns, I didn't ask permission. I didn't send work to people. I'd never written a column in my life. But what I did is I found 5 or 6 publications that were doing weekly or monthly in the Twin Cities. And I sent them, and I let everyone know. I put all their names on, and then I highlighted the one who I was sending it to, so they all knew they were competing against each other. And I said, I'm taking applications for those of you who want my service. And it was interesting. They all came to me, and you know, I got really good, coverage from 2 or 3 different publications. But you know, part of it, you know, you have to learn to be fearless. If you're going to be a writer and you sit in the corner, take up something else. I'm telling you right now, what you want to do is learn. Because I'll tell you guys, for me, I wasn't born this way. I wasn't born cocky. I was so socially silent as a kid. I mean, even before we had Spectrum or psychologists in school or things like that, I was that kid because I never talked. But it was through the help of different people and a team, you know, around me, getting me plugged into the world. I learned this confidence. So the top writers on the planet, I'm fearless. I go after them. And you know something? They don't all respond, but you'd be amazed who does. I went into this. You guys ever heard of a band called the Beatles? Now, you don't know Jim. I mean, these guys don't. Okay, my friend over there, but you know, it's like I was doing a project with them, so I was like contacting different girlfriends from the Beatles, and they were responding, and different things like that. So top authors, whoever. But it's an interesting thing. But once again, whenever you make a pitch to anyone, and it doesn't have to be about writing, it can be trying to sell bread, it can be selling cars, medical supplies, or whatever. You have to do some homework. You have to listen, you know, get whatever information on the people you're going after, and go in there polishing them. It's never about yourself, it's always about them. What do you think?
It's very true. And I think that, you have a game plan, you have the confidence, you're persistent, you're authentic, all these words that have been coming up today. That's how you have to be. One thing I want to piggyback on, though, that Jim said about taking notes on your phone. You guys all have phones. I think part of being a really good writer is being a keen observer. And when you were raising your hands before about the kinds of books that you like, I'm sure some of the things that you like about those books are the details that the writer brings to the story, especially if it's a horror story, there's detail. If it's science fiction, there's detail. A good story is nothing if there's no detail. And, you know, observing, making notes on things that you see, you might not turn it into anything, but it helps you to be more plugged into the world, to take a look at the world in a different way, And I think that some of the best books that we have, some of the best authors, they do that really successfully, and that's what draws people into stories. So I like that idea. I mean, the Notes app or whatever, it's just a thought. You can just have a thought. You can delete it when you get home. You can delete it 6 months later. But if something strikes you, don't forget it. Write it down. Who knows where you can take it.
I have something I want to ask both of you, Julie and Jim, and that would be, I went to, years ago, they had Kim Odie from the Star Tribune, Nancy Gannell from the Pioneer Press, and another gentleman who I forgot, or who I forget now, but they were the literary experts of the Twin Cities, and it was a pitch to those of us in the hospitality industry. What's the most important thing that you can do to get into the newspaper? And it was interesting, they weren't sure what the questions were going to be, and they were talking about it, but towards the end they figured out, it's kind of like you hear the car salesman say, we don't want to sell you a car, we want to sell your entire family cars for their entire lives. But with journalists, with people like Jim and Julie, these people at the expo said 99 out of 100 people that they feature in their publications never take the time to say thank you. They don't return an email. They don't leave a voicemail. They don't go back. And I'm telling you, when Julie or Jim are doing things to shine you, to shine your story, to shine your book, to shine your brand, they're spending hours doing it. It's in everyone's best interest to just take the time to say, I acknowledge that you're working for me. I told you earlier, writing is a team sport. Life is a team sport, but writing in particular, you're never going to make it on your own. Jim, how often do you get thank yous from people?
I wouldn't say necessarily thank yous. If I do a good story and I tell somebody's story, I don't get thank yous very often. I don't ask for thanks. I do, though, make a point for my case, to thank an editor for the opportunity, even if I get a rejection. Rejection letters. I'll tell you, I've got a file of rejection letters from some pretty reputable publications that didn't know what they were missing. But my proudest rejection is from National Geographic. So I will try anything.
What were you pitching in National Geographic?
Well, photographs. I subscribed to a newsletter where they were looking for photographs, editorial needs. Editors from around the country and the world would put into this magazine, we need some pictures of this or this. So National Geographic said they wanted some pictures of Canyonlands National Park. So I sent them 20 pictures. This is back in the film era. I didn't send them 50 or 100. I just picked up the best ones. I might have had a great shot of Yellowstone National Park, but they didn't want that. I'm not going to waste people's time. I sent them 20 pictures. I got 19 back with a little note saying, thanks for sending these. We'd like to hang on to one for consideration. Is that okay? Well, duh. Of course it's okay. Every 3 months I get a handwritten note from the photo editor of National Geographic. We're still considering your picture. After a year they sent it back. No explanation. So I thanked them. I wrote them letters. Thank you. But so I can grow as a professional, could you please tell me what led you to your choice? They said, well, that's easy. We were going to position the picture that on the inside of the page with the person you got looks outside of the page. We wanted the person to look inside the page. So my lesson was, I was in the ballpark. And it was just a little detail. Nothing about who I was, all through the work, just a little detail that I respected from a business point of view. But the other lesson I got is don't quit on it. I want to talk a little bit about Sinclair Lewis here. Who's heard of Sinclair Lewis before? Local kid. This guy grew up in Sauk Center, graduated from Sauk Center High School, worked at newspapers to start with. He was fired from every newspaper job he had. Started with the Sauk Center Herald, fired from the Waterloo, Iowa paper, San Francisco paper. He just was not a newspaper guy. It was probably a gift to the world that he wasn't successful as a newspaper person. That he wrote a highly successful career as a freelancer for the Saturday Evening Post. Made a pretty good living doing that. Never quit. Never quit. Asked his dad, could you loan me $20,000 to spot me a little bit so I can write, and his dad said, no. You're gonna do this, you figure out a way to do this, I'm not gonna give you some money. So that's another good lesson about, do you have to be from one of the coasts to make it big? No, you don't. Do you have to be authentic? Yes, you do. Do you have to have something to say that people are interested in? Yes, you do. Do you have to learn a little bit about the business part of it? Yes, you do. Those are all skills you can learn. And so I've got a tremendous amount of respect for Sinclair Lewis. He used to come back to Sauk Center and visit his high school friends. He's buried at Sauk Center, died in Rome. A wealthy man. He was friends with Alfred Harcourt, that started Harcourt Grace Ivanovich Publishing Company. His books made them both very wealthy. He was alcoholic and disciplined writer. He'd get up every day and he'd say, I've got 2,000 or 3,000 words I'm going to write every day. Do not wait for inspiration. If you wait for inspiration, it might not never come. You might never get anything done. If you're going to do it as a profession, you're right. And being hard on your own work. So that's a little digression here, but I want to step back here for a second, Taylor and Tracy. Are we hitting the mark here today, or is there another topic that you'd like us to broach here? And I'd also like to hear from you guys a little more. You came here today, maybe your arm twisted a little bit because the teacher said to be here, but the way people were raising their hand, there is some interest, so help us out here a little bit.
Jim, I have a question. I have my friend there in the green. I'm sorry I'd call you your name if I knew it, but you're a poet, so we're kind of in the club together. I'm a big deal, okay? I mean, you're lucky to get to talk to me. So you're not going to have award-winning, all right? You got your craft right now. What do you want to ask, and I'll make you great? What's the question?
Like, how do you get, like a book or like a poem? Like, how do you get it on paper?
How do you get it on paper? It's a good question. I mean, a lot of times, a book, everyone does it different, but like I said earlier, if you're going to start with a book and you have a skeleton and then you go through it, it's going to be boring. It's going to be lame. A book, when you're writing it, takes on a personality of itself, and to a lesser degree a poem does too. And this is just my own experience. Julie, Jim might have something different. But as I live with that, I mean, I want to be structured, I want to be disciplined, I want to know, I don't want it to become surreal and ambiguous, I want to follow, but at the same time, if I work on a poem for 10 days, I'm a different person on day 6 than I was when I started that project. Things will happen to influence whatever that thing is that I'm thinking about for that period of time. But once again, I think the key for me is to just be diligent. And I've had a lot of bad poems, and then I take them and I throw them away. Julie will tell you, she's put me under contract for books, and I've had 250 pages of the book, and I just didn't like it. I just throw it away, and then I start over. So I mean, but the more you become comfortable with yourself and your style and your method, you're going to hit it. Now it's so much easier for me. Julie, I mean, as you've, I want to be careful here, as you've aged to a certain degree, I mean, doesn't it become a lot easier?
Yeah,
Go.
It does. It does become easier, and I think to your question too, like we were talking about before too, the first step is getting it from in here to the page, and then you go over it and over and over again. Not obsessively, because I think that's a problem too. If you're just, trust what you've done. But the steps to have a book published, if that's what you're wondering too, I do, in addition to my job with PBS, I have a small publishing company, and so that's why what Klecko was talking about, that we published 5 of his books so far. And so that part of it gets easier too. When I first started, even though I had familiarity with magazines and newspapers and things, books are a whole different deal. So, but it's a process, and it's interesting for the writer to you know, when it's done, when the book is done, when you see the final version, that is pretty cool. As a publisher, that's cool too, you know? But I think you just have to be persistent, be consistent, but also, yeah, I remember that story when he told me that he threw away a whole manuscript, and I couldn't even believe that. That's like throwing away, I don't know, your kids. I don't know. I mean, it's just, like, to me, that really struck me like that. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. But to the better, you know, you have to be confident to think, no, this isn't right. So, just do it, yeah.
I'm so sorry. 6th hour is over, you guys. So if you do have to return to your 7th hour class, you can plan to stay. You are just.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks. Should we go to stage?
So Taylor, what's the next step here? What happens next?